welcome to the debate. It is late January 2026. If you have been living in America for the last 12 months, you know the ground beneath our feet has shifted. We aren't just tweaking interest rates or arguing about marginal tax brackets anymore. We are living through, well, the most radical transformation of the U.S. economy in nearly a century. We've witnessed a return to bold, unapologetic interventionism that has completely upended the old globalist consensus.
Upended is a very polite way to put it. I mean, if I were a business owner trying to plan for the next quarter, I might use words like destabilized or even chaotic. But you're right about the magnitude. The expanded tariff regime of the second Trump term, spanning all of 2025 and into this year, has touched absolutely every corner of the market.
It has, and that brings us to the central tension we need to unpack today. We are looking at two very different realities derived from the same timeline. On one side, we have the strategic resilience perspective, the idea that this protectionist wall has created an industrial renaissance, finally securing American sovereignty and reversing decades of rust. On the other side,
we have the math. And I've been diving deep into the analytical brief, and the data there paints a much, much darker picture. It suggests that what you call a renaissance is actually a death tax, a suffocating regressive levy that is bleeding the American consumer dry and actually killing more manufacturing jobs than it saves.
Well, I'm ready to defend the renaissance. I see this as the necessary shock therapy we needed to survive.
And I'm ready to defend the American wallet, so let's get into it.
I want to start with the philosophy here, because you can't understand the numbers without understanding the goal. For 30 years, the free trade orthodoxy told us that shipping our industrial base to China was efficient. They said, don't worry about the factories, we'll just do the thinking and the financing here. It wasn't efficient, it was suicide. What we have seen since the implementation of the Section 232 and Section 301 expansions in 2025 is the government finally saying enough. We are using sophisticated economic tools to protect our core.
I think sophisticated is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
Well, let's look at the steel industry. You simply cannot be a sovereign nation without the ability to make your own metal. Before these interventions, our domestic producers were drowning. They were competing against Chinese state-owned enterprises that don't care about profit, they care about dumping product to kill competition. But look at where we are now, in January 2026. The data is absolutely clear. The steel industry has reached a capacity utilization rate of 81.1%.
Right, I see that number in the report, but for the listeners who don't spend their weekends reading Federal Reserve industrial production tables, why is 81% the magic number? Why does that matter?
That's a great question. In heavy industry, volume is everything. When a mill runs at 60 or 70%, it's bleeding cash. It's barely keeping the lights on. Workers are on furloughs, maintenance is deferred. It's an industry on life support. But when you cross that 80% threshold, that is the sweet spot. You are profitable, you are running 3 shifts, you are generating the cash flow needed to repair machinery and, crucially, to invest in new technology. That 81.1% is the highest level since before the 2007 financial crisis. We have resurrected the backbone of the economy.
Okay, I don't dispute that the mills are busier. If you ban the competition, of course the local guy is going to sell more. That's basic economics. But let's look at the cost of that resurrection. You're celebrating the smoke rising from the stacks, but you're ignoring the fire burning in everyone else's bank account.
It's not just about the current output, though. It's about the future. We've seen over $15.7 billion committed to building new steel mills and upgrading facilities just in the last year. Look at the Nucor sheet steel mill project in West Virginia. That is tangible, brick-and-mortar reindustrialization. That facility is employing Americans and producing up to 3 million tons of sheet steel annually. This isn't a paper victory. It is steel in the ground. And perhaps most importantly, we have successfully lowered our import reliance on China to just 13.7%. That is a strategic victory. We are no longer dependent on a geopolitical rival to build our own bridges.
I get the Nucor looks great on a billboard argument. It's a powerful image, hard hats, sparks flying, made in the USA. But I'm sorry, I just don't buy that this is a net victory when you look at who is actually paying the bill for that mill. You call these tariffs protection tools, but the math suggests they are just a massive sales tax on American families.
That's a very harsh way to frame a trade policy.
It's the accurate way to frame it. We have to talk about pass-through rates. There's this persistent myth that when the president announces a 25% tariff on China, the Chinese government writes a check to the U.S. Treasury. That is simply not how it works.
It's a gatekeeping fee.
But the gatekeeper charges us. The analytical briefs data is undeniable here. We are seeing a 94% pass-through rate.
Explain what that means for the average person.
Sure, so let's say an American company. We can call them Acme Appliances. Imports a vacuum cleaner from overseas that costs $100 to make. The U.S. government slaps a $25 tariff on it. The Chinese factory doesn't lower their price to $75 to help Acme out. No. Acme pays $125 to get that vacuum through the port. Now, Acme operates on thin margins. They can't eat that $25. So what do? They raise the price at the store to, I don't know, $150, $160. That extra cost, that $25 plus markup, that comes directly out of your pocket when you buy the vacuum. That is the pass-through. For every $100 the government collects, $94 comes from U.S. consumers.
I would argue that is a temporary adjustment period while supply chains shift.
Temporary? It's been a year. By September 2025, the trade-weighted average tariff hit 27.4%. I mean, we haven't seen numbers like that since the Smoot-Hawley days of the 1930s. And when you break that down to the household level, the cost of this regime is estimated between $1,292 and $3,800 per year for the average family. That is real money, that is a vacation, that is a few months of groceries. You are funding this renaissance by looting the household budget.
See, I think that analysis is too static. It assumes we just keep buying the same foreign goods forever. The whole point of the price hike is to change behavior. But let's stay on this cost idea, because you're focusing on the cost of goods, but I want to talk about the value of work. You mentioned families losing money, but what about the families who are finally making money?
Are you listening?
The jobs being created and saved in these protected sectors like steel and aluminum are not minimum wage gigs flipping burgers. They are career-building, family-sustaining roles. In the iron and steel mills right now, the average annual salary has risen to $78,735. That is an $11,000 premium over the national average salary. When you protect an industry, you protect the dignity and the bank accounts of the workers in that industry. We are creating a stable middle class in the Rust Belt that had been abandoned for 30 years. Isn't that worth paying a little more for a vacuum cleaner?
If it were a one-for-one trade, maybe you'd have a moral argument, but it's not. You are falling into the classic economic trap of seeing the concentrated benefit while ignoring the dispersed cost. You point to the steelworker making $78,000 and say, look, we won, but you are ignoring the carnage in the broader manufacturing sector.
Carnage is hyperbole.
Is it? Let's look at the companies that buy that steel. The auto manufacturers, the appliance makers, the construction firms. The December 2025 data shows that broader manufacturing lost 70,000 net jobs. Why? Because you drove up their input costs. If I'm a manufacturer in Michigan and my steel costs double what my competitor in Mexico or Vietnam is paying, I can't compete. I have to cut costs. And cutting costs is corporate speak for firing people.
But are those companies actually collapsing?
They are shrinking. Look at the auto industry specifically. It shed 26,100 jobs by the end of 2025. Why? Because building a car in America became what? $2,600 to $6,200 more expensive due to these tariffs on steel, aluminum, and parts. You are saving one job in a steel mill, but you are killing 3 jobs in the factory down the road that uses that steel. That is negative math.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because it ignores the macro trend of reshoring. You're looking at monthly job fluctuations. I'm looking at the structural shift. Have you looked at the Kearney Reshoring Index?
I have.
It hit a record high of 196 in 2023, and the trend has held strong through this administration. That index tracks the movement of manufacturing coming back to the U.S. Executives are voting with their feet. They are leaving China.
They are leaving China, yes, but are they coming here? Or are they going to Vietnam, Mexico, and India?
A significant portion is coming here. 52% of executives surveyed have increased sourcing from within the United States. That is the victory.
We are building a self-reliant ecosystem. Yes, there is friction as we decouple. Change is always painful, but the destination is a sovereign economy where we make our own things.
You call it friction. I call it chaos. And this is where we need to talk about what actually happened in 2025. Because it wasn't just a clean economic policy. It was a roller coaster. Do you remember the trade war windows?
I view those as periods of high-stakes negotiation.
The markets viewed them as disasters. Let's rewind to February 4th, 2025, the fentanyl tariff announcement.
That was a pivotal moment for national security.
It was a lightning bolt out of a clear blue sky. Suddenly, the administration wasn't talking about trade balances or steel dumping. They linked market access directly to narcotics control. They said, stop the fentanyl or we shut down trade. The markets had no model for that. The S&P 500 didn't just dip, it crashed by over 10% during those trade war windows.
But that's my point. That volatility proved we had leverage.
It proved we were unpredictable. And businesses hate unpredictability. We saw CapEx, capital expenditure, drop by 13%. Companies stopped building factories, stopped buying software, stopped hiring because they didn't know if a tweet at 3 a.m. was going to upend their entire supply chain. You can't build a 20-year factory in a 24-hour news cycle economy.
See, I see why you think that was chaos. But let me give you a different perspective. That was the first time in decades we actually used our economic weight for something that matters. The fentanyl tariff wasn't about the stock market. It was about the opioid crisis that is killing 100,000 Americans a year. Conventional diplomacy failed, so we used the biggest stick we had, access to the American consumer, to force a national security outcome. And it worked.
Did it? It forced deals. We got purchasing commitments. China agreed to buy 25 million metric tons of soybeans. We secured truces with Japan and the UK because they realized the United States was no longer open for exploitation. We turned the American market into a premium club that you have to pay to enter.
But those deals are hollow. Look at the track record. China has only fulfilled about 60% of their past purchase commitments. We are disrupting our entire economy, crashing our stock market, and freezing investment for promises that rarely materialize. And while we are chasing these geopolitical ghosts, the domestic economy is choking on the universal baseline tariff of 10% and the end of the de minimis exemption.
The end of de minimis was absolutely essential, and I want to be clear on what that is for the listeners.
Please.
De minimis was a loophole. It allowed packages valued under $800 to enter the U.S. duty-free and with almost no inspection. It was designed for, grandma sending you a sweater. Instead, it was exploited by companies like Shein and Temu to flood our country with millions of cheap, uninspected packages every single day, bypassing all the taxes that American retailers have to pay.
And closing it created a logistical nightmare for small businesses. Suddenly, every small shipment, things that used to flow freely, is hit with mountains of paperwork and brokerage fees. You're not just hurting the Chinese giants, you're hurting the small Etsy seller in Ohio, the boutique importer, the independent repair shop waiting for a part. You've created a bureaucratic wall that stifles the little guy while the big corporations hire armies of lawyers to navigate it.
The little guy was being undercut by cheap, duty-free garbage from overseas. Ending de minimis leveled the playing field for American retailers who actually pay taxes and employ people here. And speaking of paying taxes, we need to talk about the revenue, because this is the part the critics always ignore.
I worry you're going to call this profit.
It is revenue for the state. We project $264 billion in customs revenue for 2025 alone. Think about that number. Historically, customs duties were a rounding error in the federal budget, maybe $30 or $40 billion. Now we are looking at $250 billion. That is real money. It reduces the federal deficit, it funds our military, it acts as a fiscal tool that allows us to potentially lower income taxes by shifting the burden to consumption of foreign goods.
But that revenue isn't free money. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills here. We established that the pass-through rate is 94%. That $264 billion isn't being paid by Beijing. It is being extracted from the pockets of the poorest Americans. That is the definition of a regressive tax.
I disagree with the characterization of it as purely regressive when it funds national services that benefit everyone.
The numbers don't lie, though. Let's look at the impact by income level. The analytical brief breaks this down perfectly. The lowest income decile, the poorest families in America, lose 2.6% of their post-tax income to these tariffs. Why? Because they spend almost all their money on goods, clothes, food, basics.
And the rich?
The top decile loses only 0.8% because the wealthy spend more on services, investments, and savings, which aren't tariffed. You are funding the government on the backs of single mothers buying shoes for their kids and students buying laptops for school.
You keep mentioning laptops and consumer goods. Let's talk about the inflation argument, because this was the big scare tactic. If you do tariffs, inflation will skyrocket. Well, look at the data.
I am looking at it.
The data shows that the Section 301 tariffs led to a minimal 0.2% increase in the price of affected domestically produced products. The hyperinflation that the doomsayers predicted simply didn't happen. The economy absorbed it because we have a robust internal market.
I'm sorry, but that is cherry-picking of the highest order. You are citing the price of domestic goods while ignoring the price of the imports that people actually depend on. Have you tried to buy a smartphone lately, or a laptop?
Prices fluctuate.
They don't fluctuate like this. Electronics prices are up dramatically. Laptops are up 34%. Smartphones are up 31%. This isn't minimal inflation. This is a massive barrier to digital adoption. You are making the tools of the modern economy, computers, phones, tech infrastructure, significantly more expensive.
It's a signal. It tells the market. Buy American or buy from our allies.
But we don't make those components here yet. That's the problem. You put the tariff cart before the manufacturing horse. By making technology more expensive, you are slowing down productivity. And productivity is the only thing that drives real wage growth. You're making us an older, slower, more expensive economy in the name of resilience.
Or we are making ourselves a secure economy. You talk about efficiency, but efficient supply chains are fragile. We saw that in 2020. We saw it when Russia invaded Ukraine. We are building redundancy. We have diversified away from China. The China plus one strategy is real. We are fortifying critical infrastructure like chips and steel. If the price of that security is a slight increase in the cost of a laptop, that is a bargain compared to being held hostage by a geopolitical rival.
A slight increase is a nice euphemism for a 34% hike. But let's look at the long run. The CBO and the Yale Budget Lab are projecting a 0.6% drag on long-run GDP. That might sound like a small number, less than 1%, but in an economy our size, that is billions of dollars of lost wealth every single year. It's what economists call deadweight loss. It's economic activity that simply vanishes, trades that don't happen, investments that aren't made, because the system is so inefficient.
The CBO also estimated that the tariffs would reduce federal outlays for interest by $0.7 trillion over a decade because of the revenue we're bringing in. We are paying down our credit card.
Only if you ignore the cost of the bailouts. You're conveniently forgetting the agriculture sector. When China retaliated, because they always retaliate, our farmers got crushed. We had to spend billions in the market facilitation program to bail them out. So let's get the logic straight. We tax consumers to pay farmers to offset the damage caused by the taxes on the consumers. It's a circular firing squad of economic policy.
The market facilitation program was a necessary bridge. It protected our food supply. And look at the result. Agriculture exports have rebounded. The point is, we didn't let the farmers fall. We supported them while we reset the global stage. We showed the world we can take a punch and keep standing.
Look, we are running out of time, but I want to leave listeners with this thought. We are isolating ourselves. We are increasing costs for our own businesses. We are making our consumers poorer, and we are losing manufacturing jobs on net. I have to ask, is the cure, these tariffs, killing the patient? The American economy is resilient, yes, but you can only bludgeon it so many times before it breaks.
That's a dramatic way to end it, but I see it differently. The goal isn't cheap goods. The goal is survival. We have successfully diversified our supply chains. We have revived the steel industry. We have generated massive revenue that stays here in our treasury. We are living in a hostile geopolitical world, and the free market doesn't care about national borders. We do. The cost you complain about, That is the price of sovereignty, and I believe it is a price worth paying.
And I believe we could have achieved security without taxing our own citizens into the ground. But that is the debate.
Indeed it is. Thank you for a rigorous exchange. We encourage you, the listener, to review the source material, the Strategic Resilience Report, and the Analytical Brief, and decide for yourself if the price of resilience is worth the cost.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time.